Hey, what's going on? Everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Honest Conversations with Mo, the Mo Love Podcast. Been a couple weeks since I last caught up with you all. And I guess just, as always, just want to go ahead and get right into the episode. And the thing that's been on my mind of late is the concept of a public figure versus a private figure. And of course, if you don't know, I guess the definitions between the two, of course, a public figure is someone who's, of influence and is seen, predominantly in a public light. Your celebrity, your politicians versus, private figure or private citizen, and, just, you're kind of, everyday person or, an individual who kind of lives their life, outside of I guess, the limelight. And honestly, this topic came to mind because it just makes me think of how sometimes within our own lives, sometimes we forget that although we aren't of maybe as receiving as much notoriety, but we do delve, of course, between that world of public versus a private figure or private citizen, and how we kind of navigate between, those worlds as individuals, and how you choose to occupy or choose to live in whichever realm you so choose. And I think uh for myself, being a person who's super private and very to myself, and then I think about kind of my profession kind of puts me in that public light in that sense as well. And I think, or even my previous role before then, it was more private centric, so it kind of catered to kind of more where I'm able to, I guess, in a sense, kind of unwind. So I think when we look at those two terms, we got to also think about our own comfortability. Which of those two worlds do we truly enjoy being in? And I think when we look at ourselves as either a public figure or a private citizen, is interested in how we choose to navigate within those worlds, because based on our comfortability, being in that public limelight may not be as easy as being obviously in the background. So I think when looking at these two different realms of kind of life that we kind of all balance and live within, is how are we choosing to appear in these worlds, even if it does not suit our comfortability. And I think that's the thing that is important about being uncomfortable, is it allows you to kind of see how you really choose to operate. And I think the thing of how we choose to operate in this world is really prevalent on us. And sometimes we forget that because we feel we either have to be a public figure, or we have to just, or we just are content with being a private citizen. And I think sometimes those who maybe you feel like all you are is a private citizen, and you're aiming to be a public figure, well, it's a matter of just how are you choosing to be a public figure in your own universe, in your own reality, you know and showing up with the people around you. So I think when we look at how we choose to navigate these two worlds, I mean, and even vice versa, if you're you're a public figure, and people constantly know you, are aware of who you are, how do you more so navigate to being more so that private citizen, and kind of living your life to how you see fit, and not in the public light. And that was just a random thing I've been thinking about of late, in terms of just how we kind of navigate this world as either private figures or private citizens. And then on to this next topic I want to get into, is the concept of just asking. And I think that for me is very much something I struggle with, just asking for help or just really, just being okay with just asking. And, I think I will say I will give myself credit in that I am good at, asking questions. And I think that's also important too, and being able to just ask questions to other people, but also being able to just ask and not have it, have, some, grand reasoning behind it of, kind of, trying to find, meaning behind something. And I think when, for example, like when I mentioned, like even just asking for help sometimes is, hard. And when we choose to, not allow others to help us, we forget that if we could have, if we would have just asked, maybe, that would have, shifted things, or that would have made, the workload easier. And I think that's something for me as as we look ahead to, 2025 is, right around the corner, of course. At the coming up early in this week on Wednesday. Yeah, the first falls on Wednesday. So just knowing that if you're willing to allow yourself to just ask, you'll see kind of the endless possibilities that are out there in the world. And for someone, such as myself who struggles with, that concept of just asking, even though I make it easy, or I'm able to easily ask questions, seems kind of conflating, confusing, right? But I think when we're able to kind of remove ourselves and kind of put this kind of, spotlight or expectation that, maybe, we were supposed to, have that answer. Maybe if, we handle it all ourselves, that, it'll be okay. But if, like I said, if you just ask, and I think it kind of ties back into, even the simplicity of, just asking questions, because just asking help is a question. And, just asking, and if they say yes or no, that's, the response you get. But the willingness to kind of do that is kind of important to kind of remove, that ego and that pride from oneself, and where you're willing to able to remember that, that it's okay not to know everything, or to, handle everything. That if we're willing to just ask, we'll able to see, kind of the endless possibilities, in the world. And that can be simply, just asking for, a pencil, or, kind of write down your ideas if an idea came to your head, or, asking a friend for a ride, as you're caught in the rain or something like that. If you don't feel, comfortable, let's say, getting an Uber or something that night, or don't feel like getting an Uber that night, just asking. And I think sometimes we forget the simplicity of just asking, because asking is hard. And I think is how, like, I would say, for myself, is that it's how, for me, I was, always overvalued, the opinion of others. So if they catch you asking, they feel like, oh, this person, doesn't know anything at all. So I think when you remove that mindset, you're able to allow yourself to easily just ask, and just be open, just asking, and let others ask too. And I think it's important on the other end too, to allow others to, just ask towards you, or ask you, because we all have, insight. And I think sometimes we forget that, because we're so caught up in wanting to know, that we forget that we do know things. And if we don't, I guess sometimes when we do know, or we're, constantly taking in information, we forget that we don't always have to, like, be willing to respond. But I think when we're willing to be patient, to allow others to just ask, instead of jumping the gun and, maybe, providing, our insight when it's not needed. And not saying that should, but I think that also, teaches that patience. And I think, yeah, not to say that you shouldn't share your knowledge. And I think sometimes we, as I said, jump the gun and, get too gung ho to kind of share kind of what we know. instead of, really like listening in. And I think that's the thing about just asking too, is are you really listening to the question being asked? Are you listening to, the response to the question you asked? So I think when you're just asking, is also being mindful of also listening, and just not being, listening to respond, but listening to listen, and, understand the person you're having this conversation with, and actually, engaging with the person in terms of, your body language, and how important that is, for such as, myself, I do, I tried, improv throughout this year. And, it was recently, I went to this, this kind of class, and it was just, kind of different, icebreakers. But I think how freeing it was to kind of, just not only allow yourself to kind of feel foolish, but also just be okay with whatever, the first thing that pops up in our head. And I think sometimes, obviously, we have to be cognizant of, the immediate things that kind of pop up in our heads. But I think when we also allow ourselves to kind of just freely speak, that without, feeling, judged by, the opinion of others, or, hoping, somebody, likes it or not, or, somebody, getting into this, herd mentality or group thing and things like that. But really just expressing yourself to, just express yourself. And I think that's the thing about just asking too, is are you just asking yourself to be yourself at all times too? And I think just asking, outside of it just being, conversationless, a day-to-day kind of mentality too. Are you just asking yourself and checking in with, hey, am I myself today? Or am I feeling like myself today? And if the answer is no, that's okay too. And I think how we choose to, operate and navigate, within, those different feelings is important as well. So I think that's, that idea of just asking, just asking. And then I want to next get into, kind of what would it take, and it was at this magic word or this magic question was at our company meeting, and it was shared by the speaker. And she had, asked us the question, kind of what would it take? And I think when you ask that question, you have to, I think it allows that accessibility to kind of ease yourself and knowing, hey, this is exactly what it would take. And I think whether it's, you're looking, for your next job, or you're looking, for love, or you're looking to build a family, or you're looking, for that next car you want to buy, or, that house you want to get, I think it's important to understand what would it take, and, the things you're willing to sacrifice, within yourself to kind of get that. And I think when we know what would it take, I think it's easier for us to see the process and see the outcome, because we know exactly what it would take for us to get there, and for allow us to kind of, kind of make the world a bit better. Because if we know exactly what it would take, such as, just asking someone, hey, what would it take to, something I can't think of it off the top of my head right now, but I'm just saying in that sense of, knowing what would it take allows you to see exactly what's possible. And I think when we know what's possible, and we know the challenges that potentially can face the outcome that we eventually want to get to, I think it's easier to deal with those challenges, because we're now more aware, and we're now more mindful of exactly what it is that, we're heading towards. So I think that question, and, I obviously want you all to kind of think about it too, kind of within your own lives, and exactly, what it would take. And for me, as like I said, going into 2025, kind of my goals for next year is kind of to, kind of embrace more, unify myself more, in that sense of unifying. For me, I said this earlier to a friend, in terms of how I sometimes, speak negatively, to myself, or speak down on myself. And I sometimes forget how, skilled or talented I am, or, the things I am good at, and, the good qualities of myself, that we sometimes forget that we're, as much as, we speak of being self-aware, that we're just, because we know, the problems, or, what's, the things that are wrong with us, that we feel like that's self-awareness. But also, oh, that's just really, just kind of speaking down on yourself. And then, because real self-awareness is also being aware of, those good things, and flowing through those good things, and, navigating in the world by being able to be willing to pat yourself on the back. And I think that doesn't necessarily make you narcissistic to, give yourself compliments. I think we have to have that balance of knowing, you know, maybe what went wrong, but also knowing the good things that we did, or the good outcome that maybe came out of it. And I think as a natural pessimist, working on that in terms of being, kind of that more positive, optimistic, kind of thinking as far as for myself. And then obviously that hopefully will, trickle into, the rest of, my life, and the rest of, the world. And when I think about, kind of what it would take, it's just, kind of that patience of, not necessarily, when anything happens, getting down on myself, but also knowing, the good that came out of it too. So as we, continue to navigate, just life day to day, and, within, obviously going into the new year, we all have, new goals. And how are we just continuously, asking ourselves, exactly what it would take for us to achieve those goals that, we have set out for ourselves. And now I want to get into what was a wild deal when it popped up, and I want to talk about the Juan Soto 15-year, $745 million contract with the Mets. And I think he had offered like 740, same amount of years. I think it was like 15 or 10. I can't remember, from the Yankees. But just thinking how the salary cap in sports is just, it is insane how astronomical it's getting. I mean, we saw Shohei Ohtani last offseason, of course, get the $700 million deal. And now, Soto getting the $745 million deal. It's just crazy how the world of sports is just, it's just so mind-boggling. And I think as someone who works in this industry, I love it, because I see the trends and the growth and the endless possibilities. And then it kind of comes back to that question that, just thinking about it, for example, we'll get into it in a few, but when you think about what it would take for why Soto took this deal over, the Yankees deal, or, he just asked for that extra, $5 million maybe from the Mets. So I think, when we think of how sports kind of trickulates into life, and we see, the endless work that it takes to kind of be the best at your craft, and to be compensated for your work is integral as well. And I think that's what I appreciate about the sport of baseball, because they have, obviously, the MLB has no salary cap. So I think they're really truly, and I think they do it obviously across all leagues, and pay you based off of your, value, and kind of your, what are you bringing to the table. But I think if you're willing to just ask for kind of that more, especially like when I think of in baseball, then compared to, the NBA or the NFL, that, you see exactly, those, the, that constant growth, within, the not only annual, but, yearly, not only annual salary, but you think of, over the duration of the contract. I mean, $745 million is insane. For, 15 years, I think that's, I want to say, can't do the math off the top of my head, but around, 50 to 60, might be a bit more, but around that, kind of annual salary. But that's just insane to think about how, and, just wanted to share that with you guys, how insane that contract is. And we're going to continue to see it in, sports. As I said, like, for example, the NBA and, the new TV deal, and how that's going to impact, the salary cap's going to increase in the, across the NBA or the NFL eventually, when they renew their TV deal, or the WNBA, currently, in CBA contract negotiations, trying to renew their CBA because they chose to opt out, even though they will play, this upcoming season. But just knowing, the business side of sports is, just always fun, and just, love sharing with you guys. And then, of course, got to get into the NBA. We got to get into the NBA Emirates Cup. Darvin Ham, I think, is the ultimate IST, or they should rename the IST trophy after Darvin Ham, the only coach to, well, him and Torian Prince, all the players and coaches to be undefeated during the IST tournament the last couple years. Obviously, that lets you know that the Bucks won, the season's Emirates Cup and in season tournament over the Thunder. They blew them out. Yeah, I think it was it was pretty much a blowout that game. But now, after the IST though, Bucks haven't been looking, just as dominant as they did during, the IST tournament. But obviously we got big news, in Lakerland and, across the NBA. The West is stacked, but the Lakers are in fifth right now. 18-13. We got, the win over the Kings, who recently fired Mike Brown, which didn't make sense. But that's for another day. That's for another. That's for another day. But yeah, big news out of Lakerland. D'Angelo Russell traded to back to the Brooklyn Nets. For Dorian Finley-Smith and Shake Milton, him and Maxwell Lewis, D'Lo Maxwell Lewis, and 3 second-round picks for Dorian Finley-Smith, DFS, and Shake Milton. So obviously Finley-Smith, brings 3-and-D, another wing for the Lakers. Shake Milton, maybe, he's been playing solid the last, kind of 5 game stretch. So maybe, bring that, kind of scoring punch. And I think, love D'Lo, but we all know, I think I speak on, the inconsistencies of D'Lo's game of just not, showing up as, as needed when we need him. And as much as we love him, and he has, those hot nights, but especially I think this season he hasn't had as many of those. So it made sense to make the move at this point. And so I like this move. I think I'm just still, hopefully we are center. And I think still kind of need a guard. I like kind of a point guard, playmaker point guard. Like I like Shake Milton. He had I think it was like 12, 16 and 12, 16 points, 12 assists night recently or whatever. But I think, we still need that, playmaker point guard. So it'll be interesting if we get that in the center as we continue building, Lakers looking good. As I said, the West is stacked. The East, I think top dogs are Cavs still at number 1, Boston at 2. And then after that, I think it's a fight. I think who's at 3 now? Orlando might still. I think Orlando's at 3. I can't remember the standings off the top of my head right now. But yeah, Lakers looking good. I like the trade. We've been playing well. At the Christmas Day win against the Warriors. And even though we should have beat the Pistons, had that loss, but playing solid, man. And I like how we continue to push. My dog, Maxi been hooping, playing solid. Averaging 16 ish. His last 3 games, playing, on both ends of the floor. So I think I like how our rosters, kind of, we're getting more, two-way guys, guys that can play both ends. So I like what the Lakers building. I don't want to jump the gun and say, it's championship just yet. I think, like I said, we're still maybe a solid big away. And that big don't have to start. We don't need a starting 5 big. We just need a big that could potentially be a starting 5 big, but they willing to come off the bench. Or do we play with AD? I don't know. If they a stretch 5 big, I'll take that. But just someone to come off the bench while AD, rest, AD minutes rest. So I think having that will be interesting as we continue to make moves. Rob Pelinka Cook, I love the cap flexibility move. Obviously getting off D'Lo's contract, bringing in Dorian Finney-Smith. He's got a player option, but then now you're $3.5 million under the second apron. So we're looking good. Still possibility for more moves. So excited. And yeah, it's been a fun, kind of interesting NBA season. Obviously, we all know the issues they've been hearing about, the ratings, and the too much 3-point shooting, which I agree is insane. Because when I see guys like Gabe Vincent, and I love Gabe. He's been playing better. He's been shooting better. Hate that he got hurt yesterday. Hopefully, he recovers well. But Gabe early on in the season, he was just chucking threes, and he was struggling like Gabe, just drive to the basket. So yeah, I just think that. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting. Obviously, we know the whole All Star game. We'll get into that as we get closer to All Star weekend. The format changes. But yeah, the NBA early on, it's been interesting. I mean, it's been competitive in the West. The East, not so much, but it's always that balance. But it's just insane how from I want to say one to one to well, I don't know if it's one because I think the Thunder still have Thunder by a good kind of margin. So I'd say maybe three down or like four down. I don't know. It's like 3-11. It's just insane, and it's like maybe two games from each other. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting as the season goes on. Heading into the next year. Lakers making moves early. I like it. I like it. So we're gonna see how DFS and Shake Milton fit into JJ's offense and what defense capabilities DFS can bring for us as well. As Vando continues to be out and not having that wing, so we should be fun. And then next I want to get into the NFL. My Falcons made a move after barely beating the Oakland Raiders week 15 on Monday Night Football. Falcons, with Kirk Cousins after I think it was 15-9, that was the game. Yeah, 15-9, beat the Raiders. Kirk was struggling. I think he threw two picks in that game, one or two, I can't remember. And then yeah, essentially made the move. We got MPX started, Michael Penix Jr., the eighth overall pick of this year's NFL draft. MPX looking good. It's a new era. It's a new time in Atlanta. Fight for our playoff lives. Tonight, MPX looked good, of course, last week against the Giants. Week 16. And then, obviously, tonight we played the Commanders. Last 3 weeks, weeks 15 through 17. Today's action, it was surprising. Like, for example, the Giants put up 40 today. A lot of teams put up 40, I think. Tampa put up 40 as well. Buffalo put up 40. Philly put up 40. Dang, a lot of teams put up 40. Hopefully my Falcons put up 40 tonight. But yeah, we're trying to fight for our playoff lives. Obviously got the Cowboys helped us out last week in week 16, beating the Bucks, put us back on top of the division. And got to just now went out the next two, and we're set. Oh, I was at the Beyonce Bowl. I was at the Christmas Day game between the Texans and Ravens in Houston, and the game wasn't, obviously that great as we saw by the scoreboard, but Beyonce was killer. She killed that halftime performance. But yeah, we headed into a playoff stretch of the regular season. As the regular season winds down, heading towards the playoffs. Hopefully my Falcons get in. Obviously gotta win tonight against the Commanders, against Jaden Daniels. Sensational, all season. MPX looked great last week. It's got to, how does he, show up this week? Obviously outside of a Cal Pitts bobbled INT, whatever had happened, he had a solid game. I think it was, I can't remember his exact numbers, but I know he had 202 yards. I want to say 70 for 29 or something. Like it was around that those numbers. But he looked good last week, just poised in the pocket, not rushing throws when the play wasn't there or the pocket broke down, throwing it away, and not allowing negative plays or creating negative downs. I loved, the poise in the pocket, the utilization of different weapons. I think he did a good job of spreading the ball around as well. So it's going to be exciting. And, it's going to be raining tonight. But he did, of course, play, in the Pacific Northwest. Oh, I think he should be fine tonight. But obviously, still excited to see what he ends up doing tonight. And for the rest of the season, if, we do end up, making it to the playoffs. Excited for MPX and just moving forward too. And I think we are building something that has the potential of something special. I think we're, a couple pieces off. And I'd say that's probably another cornerback opposite of AJ Terrell. And a true, edge rusher. And I'm not knocking, AK, Arnold Ibukady. He's been playing solid. K-17's been playing solid. 4 sacks in the last 4 games since the bye week. Defense has been incredible. I just saw, post where we've been second in the league in sacks since the bye week. Second also in yards allowed, and then fifth in scoring defense. We've been, defense is definitely playing much better than early on in the season. Just hate that we had that Kirk Cousins 4-game stretch. Kirk Cousins out of there, and now, Penix is in, and I think offense looks better too, to where now we can finally, run those, those play actions, those boots, those rollouts, and really allow more movement in offense and, different, concepts, different routes, and allowing, our run game to not be as predictable too, to allow, Bijan and Algier to kind of get downhill. So excited, hoping the best for, my Falcons. And then obviously the rest of the league, you got the teams that have already clinched. Eagles, I want to say, yeah, Eagles, or I think Eagles and Commanders are competing between who wins the division. And then clinched last week. I think the Vikings secured that wild card spot. Obviously, you got Lions #1 seed. In the NFC, Eagles 2 potentially could be, or Minnesota, if they win today, they would either end up as a wild card, or if obviously they win out and Detroit loses, they could be the 1 seed. Philly's also fighting for that 1 seed. Potentially, could lose out as well and end up as a wild card team. And the Commanders we of course will help Philly out tonight by, hopefully, getting that win. But yeah, in the AFC, Chiefs, Ravens, Bills, I'm trying to think who else in the AFC. I can't even tell what's going on in the AFC East. I think it's the Dolphins. I don't even know. Oh, I mean, obviously outside Buffalo, but who else? I don't know. The AFC South, I have no clue. Who I think Texans might still get it. Texans and Colts kind of battling for that spot. And then the AFC North, of course, you got Pittsburgh and Baltimore, fighting out for that division. So I think Baltimore pretty much has it wrapped, I think, now. I think once Pittsburgh lost to the Chiefs, yeah, that allowed Baltimore to wrap it up and win the division. But yeah, the playoffs coming around the corner. Lamar's been looking incredible. Josh Allen's been on fire. Detroit. Sam Darnold's been still looking good. It's gonna be interesting come playoff time. Philly, obviously Jalen Hurts is hurt now, but bounces back with obviously that whole entire team. But they still got Saquon, who got 2,000 yards this season after today. But yeah, and then when you think about the tank teams, I think Raiders, obviously after Pierce won that game last week, Giants won today. So I don't know what's going on. I guess they don't want either Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. But yeah, that'll be interesting, obviously, come, around NFL draft time. And then, yeah, we'll get into, obviously, top 4 as kind of close it out. And my favorite album currently is Acrylic by Yada Bands, and then of course, listening to my different sounds and different music that I like to listen to. Favorite show to watch currently? What show have I been watching kind of currently? I don't know if I really had a show I'm watching currently. I kind of just been on my shows, catching up on my usual shows, like Shrinking. Bookie is now got a new season. I saw Why Women Kill, but I don't know if there is a new season of Why Women Kill. But I saw like it pop up on my screensaver on my Fire Stick. Random tangent, but I think that might have a new season, so I'll get into that. But yeah, just kind of my usual shows. Papa's House, it's been solid. The Neighborhood, and then what do I currently have going on? Just continue to fine tune these New Year's goals, or fine tune what this New Year's words of the year kind of look like. Because I don't do, I think I said before, I don't do, resolutions. I like to do, word or kind of themes for the year. And like I said, the theme for next year will be, unify and embrace. So kind of what that looks like and continue to fine tune through that. And then what am I looking forward to? Blessed, of course, to see another year and, another year of adventures and just, more trips and more events and more learning about myself, and as always, appreciate you all listening in on my rambling, as always, and of course till the next time. This has been another episode of Honest Conversations with Mo, the Mo Love Podcast. I'll see y'all next time. Y'all have a happy new year. Peace.